Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Stephanie's Lowrlin. I'm Stephanie. Today's video is going to be a wrap up of all the books that I read in June. June for me was actually not the best reading month. I feel like I was in a bit of a reading slump throughout most of it. Towards the end of it I did read a few books that I really enjoyed though, and then I kind of got out of it. But I also had a good few books that I DNF'd, which is quite annoying because I try my best not to DNF books. But then if I want to do it, like, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to force myself through a book that I don't like when there's so many other books that I could be reading that I will like, you know. So in total in June, I read 18 books, which is not too bad. It's quite a lot actually. Also, I'm using Storygraph to get all my information of all the books I've read. I did make the decision to switch from Goodreads to Storygraph the other day because Goodreads just isn't cutting it. It's not great and it always has my times that I've read or dates read mixed up, so I swapped to Storygraph and I really like Storygraph. I've only had it for like a day or two and it's really good. I'm still figuring out how to use it, but anyways, let's move on. The very first book I read in June, which probably is easy to guess because all I do is talk about it now. Mr. Impossible by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the second book in the Dreamer trilogy. I gave this book 5 stars. No, I didn't. I gave this book 4 stars. I feel like I should go back and change this rating because it feels like a 5 stars in my head. But anyway, this book follows Ronan Lynch, who is a dreamer, and it follows after the events of the first book where something huge happens, and yeah, you follow Ronan Lynch and then also another dreamer, Jordan Hennessy, in this book. And then there's also other characters from The Raven Cycle, which is another series by Maggie Stiefvater, that are included in this book too. See, I have a vlog on it. If you haven't watched it already, go watch that. I read it in 48 hours and I really enjoyed it. It's an extremely like mind-bending book. Like, it's really chaotic and hard to get your head around, but in all the best ways, and that's kind of the way it's supposed to be. I think it was a great second book in a series. I'm really intrigued to read the last book, and it gave a lot of insight to specific characters, and there was a lot of character development in this book, which I really enjoyed, particularly with the character Declan Lynch and also Jordan. So I really enjoyed that. I was a bit disappointed that we didn't hear much from a character Adam in this book, but I understand why we couldn't, because if we did, the book wouldn't really be a book. This was really great, and of course just spectacular writing because it's Maggie Stiefvater, you know. I just love her writing. And yeah, it was really fast paced because the whole thing was practically action upon action upon action. So that was the first book I read in June, which I gave 4 stars. Then the second book I read in June was actually a fanfiction. It was a Wolfstar fanfiction. My friend has recently got me to read All the Young Dudes, and I sobbed a lot when I read that. So I wanted to read Dress Up in You. It's a bit different. It's a different like world type one, but I gave that 2 stars. I didn't really like that much, but anyway, I'm not really going to talk much about it because it's fanfiction. Then I read The Court of Miracles by Kester Grant. I read a library copy that I had of this and I gave it 2 stars. I decided to pick it up because the premise of it is like a Throne of Glass meets Six of Crows, I think, but it's a Les Miserables retelling. If the French Revolution were to come to pass, I think. That description could be completely incorrect, but anyways, I just didn't really care about any of the characters. The plot was just not there. Like, I don't know what the plot was supposed to be, and there was no type of plot twist or anything big. I don't know, it just really felt flat. Like, I just didn't care about any of it. And then I read Shatter Me by Tahira Moffi, which is the first book in the Shatter Me series. I've already read this book, so it was a reread. And as you can tell, I tapped it up a bit. I enjoyed it way more than I did the first time I read it. And I gave this 3 stars. The first time I read it, I was kind of just like, it's all right. I read it again this year because I had seen, like, there's always loads of hype around this series on BookTube. So I was like, well, I read the first and second book and I didn't really see where the hype came from and stuff. But yeah, it follows our main character called Juliet, and she has been locked up in an asylum because her touch is lethal. Yeah, and basically she ends up coming out of this asylum to be a sort of pet project of one of the leader's sons in this world. There's not really much I can say about it because I feel like I would spoil it, because I'm not good at talking about books, like the first book in the series, if I've read the others, because the information gets all mashed in my head. But I did enjoy it. It wasn't the best in the series, obviously, because it's only the first one, but I still did really enjoy it, and I enjoyed the relationships in it and all the characters, and like being introduced to all the characters that I now love. Then I read the novella that follows up Shatter Me. It's Destroy Me by Tahereh Mafi, of course. I'm not sure what character this one actually follows. I think this one follows Warner's character, but I'm not sure. But I really did enjoy it. I give it 4 stars. These novellas are really short. They're like under 100 pages, and they just kind of give insight to a different character's point of view in the Shatter Me series. Yeah, it was really quick read, really fun, and really cool to, you know, see a different character's perspective of the story. And then the next book I read, which follows up on that as well, is the second book in the series, which is Unravel Me. This one I enjoyed much more than Shatter Me. As you can tell, I tabbed up a lot more, and it just got really interesting, and there was a lot of character development that I really liked, and relationship development, and also new characters introduced, which I loved. And there was great action in this one too. That was really intense and fun to read. So I gave this one 4 stars. Then immediately after that, again, I was kind of on a bit of a Shatter Me binge, and I also read these during the Reese Readathon that I have a video on if you want to go watch that. So this is the 3rd book in the series, Ignite Me. This one was my favourite out of all 3 that I'd read. I have since read the 4th book, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but this one was my favourite, and as you can tell, loads of tabs. This is just so good. You find out more about particularly Juliet and Warner and their character development, and yeah, it was intense and just so great to read. Also, one thing about this series is Tahereh Mafi's writing is literally spectacular. Like, she writes extremely poetically, and she has very flowery writing, which I really enjoy reading. So most of these pink tabs are actually favourite quotes of mine from the book. So I gave this, I didn't even tell you, but like you would expect, I gave it 5 stars. It was absolutely amazing, and I really enjoyed it. I think I read this in like a day. Then I read Fracture Me is the next novella. I gave this 3 stars. This is actually in the point of view of Adam Kent, and I gave it such a low rating because I just don't particularly like Adam's character. Like, he really pisses me off, and I don't like him, so that's why it was so low. But I didn't want to rate it like 2 stars or 1 stars because I did enjoy reading a lot about Adam's little brother and also Kenji. That was really nice to read about. So yeah, that was that. Then the next book I read was Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. This was a library copy. Going into it, I thought it was something different, but I was wrong. I was very wrong, and I think that's why my rating went down a bit, but I gave it 3 stars. This book follows our main character Eliza, who has a very famous webcomic, and she's a very shy, kind of secluded girl in real life, but then online she's, you know, has this big webcomic, is friends with loads of people, but her identity is actually hidden. She doesn't go by her name on it. So yeah, we follow Eliza and her webcomic, and she ends up meeting this guy who also likes her webcomic. And yeah, it's just about their relationship and all the kind of trials and tribulations that come with being famous online. It was enjoyable and it was a quick read, and I really liked the graphics in it, but I went into it thinking it was going to focus way more on her mental health, and it didn't do that except for like a little bit at the end, so that's why I was kind of didn't really hit the mark for me. Then the next book I read, which I actually found, I bought it because I found it in like the randomest shop. It was like a clothes shop, and I found it and I literally bought it because it was floppy, and then I looked up reviews on it, and the reviews, there was this one reviewer that I follow that I really like and she loved it, and that's Beneath the Citadel by Destiny Soraya. This book was amazing. I'm so glad I picked it up. It's floppy, which is just wonderful, and it has a really pretty cover actually. I gave this 4 stars. It follows 4 best friends who are like, it's like a found family type of trope, and they are living in a city that is governed by prophecies. There are also certain types of elemental magics as well that can be involved in it. But basically they are rebels and they are rebelling against this government, and you just kind of follow them trying to prevent this huge prophecy that has been told that will put them all in danger. I loved the friendship dynamics in this and just the found family, and also there was really good relationships in them, and just the characters themselves, like there was extremely good rep. There was multiple characters of color, and then there was also there's an asexual main character, there's a bisexual main character, there's a gay main character. It was just wonderful, absolutely amazing. The banter between the characters, phenomenal, and it was really action-packed. Like I was constantly continuing reading it because I just wanted to know what happened next. So for how big it is, it was amazing, and for a fantasy standalone, absolutely wonderful, so good. The next book I read it on my iPad, and I read it because one of my friends has read it and he loves it, and I am so glad I picked it up. It was around this time that I was kind of in a bit of a slumpy mood during the month, and when I picked up this book, I like got out of my slump. It was so good. So that book was If We Were Villains by ML Rio. This book I gave 5 stars, of course. Follows a few main characters, and they are in a drama college, a really prestigious drama college, and it's a dark academia book, and it's full of Shakespearean references and just theatre life. It's absolutely wonderful in that aspect. Basically, someone gets murdered, and you jump back in time from one of our main characters being in prison for the murder, and he is retelling the story, so you kind of follow along as he's retelling it. It's written in a really wonderful and readable way, because of these kind of flashbacks and essentially retelling of the story, which I really enjoyed. It made it really easy to follow, and it just really enhanced the reading experience. Yeah, I don't know how else to explain it other than you need to read this book. It's so good. It's so angsty and dramatic and theatrical, and the characters are just so lovable, and their relationships with each other are just so intense and dependent. The dramatic. That book was amazing, so you should definitely read it if you haven't. The next book I read, which was a bit of a disappointment for me to be honest. I bought this and I was really excited about it because everyone on BookTube was raving about it. That's Legendborn by Tracy Dion. First off, the most beautiful book ever. It just didn't really work for me. I don't know, like it felt quite boring in places, and the plot twists were okay, but they just like didn't really make sense. I don't know, maybe it's just because it's the first in a series, but I just didn't like it that much. I gave it 3 stars because the end did bring up the rating, but it just still wasn't the best book I've read, and I was expecting much more out of it. So basically it's the first book in a fantasy series, and it follows our main character Bree, and she is grieving from her mother's death. Her mother died 3 months ago, only when this story starts out, and she is going to this college, and at this college she figures out that there's this society that have magical creatures and magical powers, and Brie ends up getting entangled in this society, and you kind of just follow all the adventures she has there. I didn't really like all of the characters. I liked some of the characters. One aspect of the story I did like was it was really diverse, not only in the actual characters, but also in just the conversations that were being had, which I thought was really interesting. But yeah, only 3 stars because it just wasn't great, in my opinion. Then the next book I read was Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. I also mentioned this in one of my vlogs. This book was also a bit of a letdown for me. I only rated it 2 stars. I've had it on my shelves for a good while, so I wasn't expecting too much from it, but still. It's in a world where everyone is divided by blood, so you either have red blood or you have silver blood. Silver bloods are the prestigious kings and queens, rich people, and then the red bloods are the slaves, the poor people. Our main character Marie is a red, and she ends up having to go into one of the silver's houses and work for them, and it's there that she figures out that she has a kind of power that only silvers have. So she ends up having to stay in this castle and pretend to be a silver. So it follows her and all of the political intrigue and webs that come with being in the silver world as a red. The whole premise of the book was quite interesting to me, but just the delivery just wasn't there. The characters didn't really impact me that much. Like, I didn't care about them, and even though a lot happened in this book, I feel like nothing happened. It's very hard to explain, but I didn't really like it. So yeah, I gave that 2 stars. Then the next book I read was the 4th book in the Shatter Me series, which is Restore Me. And this book I gave 4 stars. I can't really say much about it because it is the 4th book in the series, but same thing as the others. Writing was impeccable. The pacing of the story was done really well in this one especially, and I also loved the different backstories we got of specific characters that we mightn't have figured out before, and yeah, it was really interesting to see more about the characters and to see a lot of characters develop and everything. So I'm really excited to read the next one. Then the next book I read, we're nearing to the end now, is another library book, and it's Lament by Maggie Stiefvater. I only picked this up because it's a Maggie Stiefvater book, and as we know, I love Maggie Stiefvater. This book I gave 3 stars. I wasn't expecting much from it, but it was fun. It was a fun read. It wasn't amazing, but it was fun. It follows this 16-year-old girl, Dee, and she lives in a world where there are fairies, but most people can't see them. But Dee is a person who can. And basically she meets this lad called Luke, and he's an assassin, and he has come to kill her, but they end up falling in love. It's a bit of an enemies to lovers trope. And yeah, it was just fun to read, and I really just adored Luke as a character. He was great. There's not much for me to say about it. I feel like it was an enjoyable read, and if you like Maggie Stiefvater, you should read this book. Then the second last book I read this month, or for the month of June, was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. Now, I didn't start this in June, but I finished it in June. I actually started it like a good few months ago, I think maybe in April. And it has taken me quite a long time to finish it. When I started reading this book, I was really excited because everyone on BookTube raves about it. It is an adult fantasy, which is maybe the reason why I didn't like it as much. It follows our main character, Rin, who is quite poor, and she ends up taking a test for this really prestigious, extremely hard to get into school or academy. And she gets in, she passes the test, and you kind of follow her life in the academy, but it also shows you her life for the next couple of years too. It's really hard for me to explain because I feel like I didn't really understand a lot of the story because it was really infused with history, and there was just a lot of world building and information that I just may not have picked up on. I did love the characters. I thought Rin was a really interesting character to have as a main character because she makes mistakes. like everyone, and she's not your typical heroic main character, which I really enjoy. We follow her as she makes mistakes, as she purposely does things that she's told not to. That was one thing that I really enjoyed reading about. The whole actual backstory of everything and the folklore, I am pretty sure it's Chinese folklore or Chinese lore, that the author herself has studied in college, which is quite plain to see when you read the book. Like the information is, there's so much of it, and it's written in a way that you know she knows what she's talking about. So I actually found the lore quite interesting to read about, but I don't know, it didn't really take my interest, and it took me so long to read that I just had to rate it 2 stars, because I didn't really, when I finished the book, I didn't want to read the next one, which is quite disappointing because I was hoping I could read the whole series. Then the last book I read it in June. I'm actually not sure if I read it at the start of June or at the end of June because of, like I said, my Goodreads being like all over the place. But that was Carry On by Rainbow Rowell, which I've mentioned in another video. I'm not going to talk long about it, but I gave it 3 stars because it was really fun to read, and I liked the characters and I liked the relationship. But yeah, it was just a fun book. It wasn't amazing, but it was fun. That was all the books that I read during the month of June. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any suggestions of what you want me to film, please let me know. And if you haven't already watched my other videos, please go watch them. Yeah, subscribe to my channel if you want.